For centuries, the story was simple. A civilization vanished. In the high desert of the American Southwest, across 2,600 square kilometers of sandstone, buildings stood empty for 800 years. Perfect masonry, 5 stories tall, aligned with the stars, completely abandoned. Textbooks told us a peaceful farming people, one of the most sophisticated cultures in pre-Columbian North America, simply disappeared around 1200 AD. This mystery, with no ending, shaped our understanding for a century and a half. But then, ancient DNA was extracted from the bones these people left behind. The results did not just revise the story, they overturned almost every part of it. The Anasazi were never who we thought they were. And more unsettling than that, they never actually vanished. The DNA revealed something far stranger than a disappearance. It had been hiding in plain sight the entire time. A civilization was called lost while its descendants lived in the same valleys, performed the same ceremonies, and carried in their bodies the exact biological record of the ones who built the great houses. This genetic evidence did not just add a new chapter to history, it dismantled a century-old narrative. What was the true story of this sophisticated civilization? And how did DNA expose such a profound misunderstanding? Chaco Canyon sits in the high desert of northwestern New Mexico. It is a shallow cut of sandstone, about 14 kilometers long. Today, it is surrounded by nothing. There is no significant river, no fertile valley, no obvious reason why anyone would build anything there at all. Yet, between roughly 900 AD and 1150 AD, Chaco Canyon became the political, religious, and architectural center for a civilization. This civilization stretched across 233,000 square kilometers, an area larger than Ireland. They built over 150 great houses. These were massive stone structures, some rising up to 5 stories. Some contained over 600 rooms. Modern builders still find it difficult to match the quality of their masonry. The walls were engineered with interior rubble cores. Precisely cut sandstone veneer faced them. Builders aligned the rooms to track the movements of the sun and moon across decades-long cycles. One structure, a spiral petroglyph on Fajada Butte, marked the summer solstice to within a matter of minutes. This design showed incredible astronomical precision. They also connected it all. A network of roads, some 9 meters wide, ran in perfectly straight lines across the canyon country for hundreds of kilometers. These were not ordinary trade routes. They climbed cliffs instead of going around them. They ignored the natural terrain. These roads were built to communicate something about the culture that made them, not just to move goods. At the center of every great house sat the kivas. These were circular, sunken, ceremonial chambers. Some were small, others large enough to hold hundreds of people at a time. These were gathering places, altars. Whatever held this civilization together was reinforced here, generation after generation, for nearly 300 years. By every measurable standard, Chaco was extraordinary. The planning, the engineering, the astronomical precision, the sheer scale of coordinated labor needed to build it all. This was not a scattering of villages. This was something larger, something organized. It had a clear center of gravity. Then, around 1200 AD, it ended. Not gradually, not slowly. The great houses were abandoned within a few generations. The roads fell silent. The population that had built and maintained one of the most ambitious construction projects in prehistoric North America simply walked away. They left it all standing. Perfect masonry, 5-story walls, ceremonial chambers full of ritual objects. Empty. The sudden end of Chaco Canyon raised a great mystery for American archaeologists. What exactly happened there? Where did everyone go? For a long time, the answer that appeared in textbooks was reassuring. It described a peaceful farming civilization, a democratic, egalitarian people, nearly utopian, in fact. They worshipped the sun, the corn, and the seasons. They lived in harmony with the land and with each other. For unknown reasons, this civilization eventually dispersed into the wider desert. It faded from history. They were given a name borrowed from the Navajo language, Anasazi. This word now carries uncomfortable connotations. Many archaeologists today prefer the term Ancestral Puebloan, but for most of the last 100 years, Anasazi was the name attached to this mystery. And the mystery had a very tidy shape. A civilization rose, a civilization vanished. Here are the ruins they left behind. That was the story. It was the story told in museums. It was in documentaries. It was taught to generations of school children. It was repeated in scholarly textbooks: peaceful farmers, lost civilization, vanished people. The problem? Almost every part of that story was built before anyone could actually read the bones. This was before ancient DNA analysis existed, before forensic taphonomy became a rigorous scientific field, before anyone sequenced the genetic material from the skeletons buried beneath those great houses, before anyone compared that DNA to the populations living across the Southwest today. The textbook version of the Anasazi was constructed from pottery, from architecture, and from a great deal of wishful thinking. It was a story written in the absence of the most important evidence. When that evidence finally arrived, in the form of ancient DNA pulled from bones that had sat in museum drawers for a century, it did not gently revise the textbook version. It dismantled it. Ancient DNA analysis does exactly what its name suggests. Scientists pull genetic material from bones, even ones buried for hundreds or thousands of years. They compare this ancient DNA to modern genetic samples. This creates a detailed biological picture. It shows who these people were, where they came from, and how they connect to populations living today. It is a time machine made of bone. For most of the 20th century, this was not possible. The technology simply did not exist. Archaeologists studied the ancestral Puebloans through pottery fragments and architectural styles. Sometimes they looked at the oral traditions of descendant communities, but often these communities were not consulted at all. They built complex theories based on the shape of a corn-grinding stone or the design of a ceremonial pot. They worked with the best tools they had. But the bones themselves, the actual biological record of these people, sat in museum drawers. They remained mostly unstudied. Then, in the 2010s, ancient DNA sequencing changed everything. It became precise enough to extract readable genetic material from Chacoan skeletal remains. The first study to do this at Pueblo Bonito delivered a shocking result. Pueblo Bonito was the grandest of the great houses in Chaco Canyon. The finding should have shattered the peaceful, egalitarian narrative on its own. The individuals buried in Room 33 were not a random sample of the Chacoan population. Room 33 was one of Pueblo Bonito's most important burial chambers. These individuals were closely related, their lineage traced through the female line across 9 generations. This was a Matri dynasty. It was a ruling family that buried its dead in the same room, in the same great house, for more than 300 years. The graves held reed mats and thousands of turquoise pieces. They contained conch shell trumpets from the Pacific coast. These were not the burials of equal citizens in a democratic farming community. These were the tombs of a hereditary elite. This ruling class held power in Chaco throughout its entire rise and collapse. Textbooks described a people without kings. The DNA revealed a dynasty. But then came the second finding. This one genuinely unsettled the field. Researchers compared the broader genetic profile at Chaco Canyon to the people living around it. Something did not add up. The ancestral Puebloans across the wider region shared a clear genetic signature. This was consistent. The hunter-gatherer and early farming groups had lived in the desert for thousands of years. Their genetic markers appeared in almost every skeletal sample across the Four Corners area. But at Chaco Canyon itself, especially among the elite burials, there were extra signals. These signals did not match the surrounding populations. They appeared to enter the Chacoan gene pool from somewhere else, somewhere outside the Southwest entirely. This was not a minor finding. In archaeology, this kind of genetic difference almost always points to migration. It means a new population arrived. It means a new power structure was set up. The timing of this genetic signal also aligned perfectly. It showed up in burials from the 9th through the 12th centuries. This was exactly when Chaco Canyon changed from scattered pit houses into the grandest architectural project in prehistoric North America. Something arrived at Chaco around 900 AD. This something took up residence in the most elite spaces. It brought a new genetic signal. It brought a new architectural ambition. And it brought a new idea for how power should be organized. The obvious question followed. Where did it come from? The DNA could point to an answer, but it could not deliver it alone. Ancient genetic signals can tell you when a population is an outlier. They can tell you that the outlier points in a specific direction on a map. But to confirm the source, you need more than genetics. You need architecture. You need artifacts. You need the small cultural fingerprints that travel with people when they move from one place to another. If this kind of historical detective work fascinates you, subscribe. The next piece of evidence is even more surprising. The genetic trail pointed away from the southwest, so researchers looked south. They examined the trade goods that began appearing in Chaco Canyon around 900 AD. This included macaw feathers from tropical Mexico. There were also copper bells, clearly part of the Mesoamerican metalworking tradition. Scientists even found cacao residue in ceremonial vessels. Biochemical tests on ceramic fragments identified it. Cacao only grows in tropical lowlands, more than 1,600 kilometers away. Both the genetic evidence and the material evidence agreed. The signal pointed toward the Valley of Mexico. But what they found there was darker than anyone expected. To understand what the DNA was suggesting, you have to know what was happening 1,000 miles to the south. This was the 9th century, just before Chaco's golden age. The Valley of Mexico was in crisis. The great classical civilizations of Mesoamerica were breaking apart. Teotihuacan, once the largest city in the Americas, had collapsed centuries earlier. The Maya cities in the southern lowlands were emptying out. Power was fragmenting. Populations were moving. Mesoamerican religious and political traditions, with their blood rituals and theocratic elites, were looking for new ground. Around this same time, Chaco Canyon began to change. Architectural evidence was the first thing that struck researchers. At Wupatki, on the western edge of the Chacoan world, archaeologists found a ball court. Not just a version of one, but an actual Mesoamerican ball court. These were used for ritual games played across the Valley of Mexico for over 1,000 years. No tradition of ball courts existed anywhere else in the Southwest. There was no local evolution that could explain its presence in the Arizona high desert. It had been imported. Inside Chaco Canyon itself, at the great house called Setro Kettle, a colonnaded facade appeared along one of the central walls. Columns arranged in a row along a ceremonial space. This exactly matched the architectural style of Mesoamerican temples hundreds of miles to the south. No one in the surrounding Southwest built anything like it. Later, someone filled the columns in, as if the signature had become uncomfortable. But the original construction was unmistakable. Someone at Setro Kettle had been building in the style of the Valley of Mexico. Then came the teeth. In the ceremonial heart of Pueblo Bonito, among the elite burials that had already shown the dynastic matrilineal signal, researchers found a single-filed tooth. This specific style of dental modification, shaped and chipped, was common across Mesoamerica. It was completely unknown anywhere in the Southwest, the Great Basin, the Rocky Mountains, or the Great Plains. There was no tradition of tooth modification north of Mexico. None. Yet it was there, in the grave of an elite Chacoan. A signature that could only have been carried north by someone born and raised in Mesoamerica. The genetic data confirmed what the dental evidence suggested. The outlier signals in the Chacoan ruling burials aligned with populations from central Mexico. This was not a mass migration. It was a small, concentrated presence. These people were deposited directly into the highest status spaces of the most powerful great house in the canyon. A clear picture began to assemble itself. Around 900 AD, a small group of people from the collapsing Mesoamerican world traveled north. They were not refugees in any conventional sense. They arrived at Chaco Canyon with knowledge, architectural knowledge, astronomical knowledge, religious knowledge. Within a few generations of their arrival, Chaco transformed. It went from a modest agricultural settlement into a coordinated theocratic center. It had great houses, road networks, ceremonial chambers, and a ruling dynasty that would hold power for nearly 3 centuries. The DNA could not tell researchers exactly how many of them there were. Estimates based on the genetic signal strength in elite burials suggest it was a small group, perhaps a few dozen or maybe a single founding lineage. But whatever the number, they had not come as equals. They established themselves at the top of whatever social structure already existed in the canyon. Then they built something unprecedented on top of it. This alone rewrote the standard narrative. A peaceful, egalitarian farming community does not transform itself into a coordinated theocracy with monumental architecture overnight. Civilizations of that kind are almost always the work of organized elites. These elites arrive with a template in mind. The template at Chaco looked increasingly like a smaller northern copy of the Mesoamerican theocratic model, a ruling class with specialist knowledge, a religious hierarchy, astronomical rituals calibrated across decades. monumental construction as an expression of cosmic order. The Mesoamerican template, however, held a darker truth. It carried a religion that demanded blood. For much of the 20th century, one physical anthropologist worked almost alone. His name was Christy Turner. He tried to explain what the bones from Chaco Canyon were actually showing. For more than 30 years, his colleagues wished he would simply stop. Turner had trained as a forensic consultant. He worked with American police investigating homicides. He knew exactly what human bones looked like when they were treated gently after death. He also knew what they looked like when they were treated as something else entirely. When he began examining skeletal collections from Chaco Canyon and the surrounding great houses, he saw a pattern. It did not fit the peaceful farmer narrative at all. The bones had been processed. They were not buried. They were not cremated. They were not laid to rest in any way that matched the ceremonial traditions of the surrounding ancestral Puebloan world. Instead, they had been dismembered, broken, burned, scattered. The damage on them matched, with disturbing precision, the damage Turner saw on the bones of animals butchered for food. He spent decades building a forensic checklist for cannibalism. A minimum of 6 specific criteria had to be present. Only then would he conclude that skeletal remains showed evidence of cannibalism, not just violence, not ritual mutilation, actual processing of a human body as food. His criteria were specific, and they were testable. First, burning on the backs of skulls, but not on the faces. This was consistent with a head placed on a fire while the brain was still inside. Second, anvil abrasion. This was a distinctive scraping pattern. It happened when a defleshed bone was smashed between 2 stones to extract marrow. Third, cut marks. These were made by stone tools, not teeth or erosion. They were located at the specific joint endpoints where tendons hold muscle to bone. Fourth, pot polish. A fine, abrasive sheen left on bone fragments that had been stirred inside ceramic cooking vessels. Fifth, fracture patterns. These were consistent with breaking fresh bone, not weathered bone. The 6th criterion was the most damning of all. It was the systematic absence of vertebrae. Vertebrae are the richest source of marrow in the human body. In nearly every processed assemblage, they had been pulverized. When this checklist was applied to the Chacoan material, the results were undeniable. The field could not simply dismiss it. Turner and his colleagues identified nearly 300 individuals across dozens of Chacoan sites. Their remains met the full forensic criteria: men, women, children, infants, all processed identically to the way Chacoan hunters processed deer and rabbit. Even then, many researchers argued that processing did not prove consumption. The bones showed butchering, they said. They did not show eating. A body could be dismembered for ritual purposes, for execution, for punishment of enemies, all without the flesh actually being consumed. This distinction mattered. The gap between butchering and consumption was where the debate lived for more than 20 years. The gap closed in 1997. At a site called Cowboy Wash in southwestern Colorado, excavators found the remains of 7 individuals. They had been processed according to every one of Turner's 6 criteria. And in the hearth at the center of the community, alongside the cooking vessels, they found something else: a coprolite. This was desiccated human feces, preserved by the dry desert climate. It was deposited right there at the scene of the processing. Biochemist Richard Marlar took the coprolite to his lab at the University of Colorado. He designed a test for a single protein: human myoglobin. Myoglobin is found only in skeletal muscle. It does not exist anywhere else in the human body. It is not present in the intestinal tract of a person who has eaten plants or animals. The only way human myoglobin can appear in human feces is if one human being has eaten the skeletal muscle of another. Marlar ran the test 6 times, in triplicate. Across several weeks, with every possible control, every single result came back positive. Cannibalism at Cowboy Wash was no longer a hypothesis. It was a biochemical fact, confirmed by a test that had never before been applied to the archaeological record. The question remains: was it for survival, ritual, or something more organized and terrifying? Once the evidence from Cowboy Wash became accepted, a wider pattern across the Chacoan world came into focus. About 1 in 50 skeletal remains showed the full forensic signature. The locations of these cases matched almost perfectly with where the great houses stood, 90% of the processed remains were found inside or very near Chacoan ceremonial centers. The timing was even more precise. The cannibalism appeared in the archaeological record right when Chaco rose. It vanished almost exactly when Chaco fell. This pattern was too specific to be an accident. Cannibalism happened during peacetime, in a region with no signs of widespread war. The area also had plenty of food. It was concentrated in and around the ceremonial centers of a coordinated theocratic civilization. This was not a sign of hunger. It was not a sign of fighting. It was the mark of something organized. Turner and his fellow researchers built their theory slowly over many years. They tested it against every other possible explanation. What emerged was a single picture combining genetic evidence, architectural details, dental findings, and forensic data. A small group arrived in Chaco from the collapsing Mesoamerican world in the late 9th century. They brought ball courts, columned buildings, and astronomical alignments. They also brought a religion that had supported Mesoamerican elites for centuries. This was a religion where the universe needed blood to work. It was a religion where priests eating human flesh, made holy by cosmic rules, showed the ultimate power over others. In the Valley of Mexico, this religion had been the basis of social control for 1,000 years. Elite priests ate the bodies of sacrificed captives. The ceremony was public. The message was clear. The gods demanded it, the priests carried it out, and anyone who fought the system would become the next offering. When moved to the American Southwest, this religious model did not need many believers. It needed a small, organized, ruthless elite. It needed a local population terrorized into obeying. The people called Anasazi in this view were not the cannibals. They were the subjects. They were the victims. A ruling family held this population in place for nearly 3 centuries. They had imported a system of religious terror from 1,600 kilometers away. They adapted it to the sandstone canyons of the Four Corners. This explains the specific patterns in the bones. It was cannibalism as a weapon, not for food. The forensic record does not show communities regularly eating their dead. It shows concentrated, terrible events. Whole families were processed in a single night. Children were killed alongside their parents. Bodies were cut apart with ceremonial precision. Then they were left scattered in the ceremonial rooms of great houses. Everyone in the region would know what happened and why. The purpose, Turner argued, was not nutrition. The purpose was a message. A terror campaign needs relatively few victims to control thousands of people. News of what happened in one village was enough to make 50 others obey. The threat did not need to be carried out often. It only needed to be believable. In a culture that saw Chaco's ceremonial centers as the religious heart of its world, a message delivered through those centers carried overwhelming weight. This is where the story gets truly difficult to tell. The Pueblo descendant communities, the Hopi, Zuni, Acoma, and Rio Grande Pueblos have questioned this interpretation for decades. They have correctly pointed out that accusations of cannibalism have historically been used to dehumanize native peoples. They argued that forensic evidence, no matter how precise, cannot fully explain the meaning of past events. They insisted that whatever happened at Chaco, it happened to their ancestors, not because of them. This distinction matters. The evidence itself supports their framing. The genetic signals, the dental changes, the architectural styles, the myoglobin found in the coprolites, all of it points to the same conclusion. A small elite linked to Mesoamerica terrorized the local population. This theocratic system used religious violence to keep control. What the descendant communities said all along, and what the DNA now confirms, is clear. Cannibalism at Chaco was not a part of Puebloan culture. It was something done to Puebloan culture. An imported ruling class used a borrowed religion to hold power for 2.5 centuries. The Chacoan world was not built on agreement. It was held together by terror. And terror, as every civilization that has ever relied on it eventually learns, has an expiration date. Around 1150 AD, that date arrived. The expiration date for the terror system arrived around 1150 AD. When it did, everything built on that foundation fell apart at once. The collapse came from multiple directions. The timing of its arrival is one of the most precisely documented transitions in North American archaeology. The first sign came from the climate. Tree ring analysis across the Four Corners region shows that the warming trend ended. This method lets researchers reconstruct rainfall patterns year by year, going back more than 1,000 years. The long period of warmth had helped Chacoan agriculture for almost 3 centuries. It broke in the middle of the 12th century, between roughly 1130 AD and 1180 AD. The Southwest entered a prolonged drought. Winters turned colder, summers became drier. The rainfall patterns that let Chacoan farmers grow corn in places that should not have supported it began to fail. This happened season after season. It lasted long enough to destroy the agricultural base of the entire system. Chaco had always been vulnerable. The canyon itself had no reliable water source. The great houses, roads, and ceremonial centers relied on a massive, coordinated effort. Food and materials moved from outlying regions into the ritual core. When those outlying regions could no longer produce extra food, the ritual core could not feed itself. The theocratic system, which had controlled hundreds of square miles, started to shrink. The tribute stopped flowing. Coordination broke down. Then a second signal appeared. This one is visible in the bones. The cannibalism signature present in the Chacoan archaeological record for over 200 years began to disappear. It vanished almost exactly when the drought started. The latest forensic evidence meeting Turner's 6 criteria clusters tightly around 1150 AD. After 1180 AD, these signs essentially stopped appearing in the archaeological record, not gradually, not slowly. The system that produced these remains for 250 years simply stopped. Something had ended. Archaeology cannot say for certain what happened. Did the local population rise against the elite? Did the priests lose their religious authority? Or did the entire coordinated system dissolve under the pressure of a failing food supply? What the record can say is this. Within a few decades of the drought's start, the great houses were abandoned. Not destroyed, not burned, abandoned. The residents walked away, leaving their homes standing. By 1200 AD, the canyon was quickly emptying. By 1250, the outlying Chacoan communities were also becoming vacant. By 1300, the Four Corners region, which had supported one of the most organized societies north of Mexico, was effectively empty of human life. The ceremonial chambers, once filled with hundreds of people, fell silent. The roads, stretching across 233,000 square kilometers, were reclaimed by the desert. The great houses, built with such careful precision, were left to the wind and the sun. This is the moment the textbook narrative usually stops. The vanishing, the mystery, the lost civilization, the empty buildings, the unanswered question of where everyone had gone. This is where that narrative has always been wrong. The depopulation of Chaco was not a disappearance. It was a migration. The people who lived under the Chacoan system, who survived whatever happened in those great houses for 250 years, did not vanish into the desert. They moved south and east. They followed the rivers that still ran along the Rio Grande down to the Little Colorado. They went to the mesas and fertile valleys where farming was still possible in a drying climate. They carried with them the knowledge of agriculture, astronomy, and masonry that had sustained their ancestors. They left behind the ceremonial centers of a system that no longer seemed worth preserving. At this point, the archaeological trail grows quiet. The forensic record becomes thin. The great houses sit empty. For over 6 centuries, this story was told only in the oral traditions of their descendants. The buildings in the high desert of the American Southwest have stood empty for 800 years. They are now a testament to migration, not disappearance. The people who built them never really left. Ancient DNA confirmed this in a series of studies over the last decade. The Ancestral Puebloans did not vanish. Their descendants have been living in plain sight the entire time. The real question was never where they went. The question was why anyone ever believed they had gone at all. A whole civilization was called lost while its descendants lived right there. People were called vanished while they farmed the same valleys. They performed the same ceremonies. They carried in their bodies the exact biological record of the ones who built the great houses. Oral traditions told this story accurately for 800 years. Archaeologists simply refused to listen. Ancient DNA did not rediscover the Ancestral Puebloans. It just confirmed what had never actually been forgotten. It was only forgotten by the people who came later and decided the story needed a different ending. The real mystery of the American Southwest is not what happened to the people who built Chaco Canyon. It is how long it took the rest of us to notice they were still here. This story shows the power of scientific evidence. It can validate indigenous oral traditions that have been ignored for too long. It reveals a complex history of survival and resistance. It replaces simplistic narratives of disappearance. Subscribe if this kind of history, where science meets old stories, is your thing. And tell me in the comments, what other historical mysteries do you think have been misread for centuries?